Hi, everybody. Today I want to talk about a very important topic that anyone who is raised or has contact with a narcissist has surely experienced, and that's gaslighting. Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation, and it involves someone trying to make another person question their reality, their memory, their perceptions, and even their sanity. It's often used in relationships to gain power and control. And if your mother is a narcissist, I'm sure you're aware, being in power and having control is of utmost importance to them. The term is actually from a play and film from almost 100 years ago called Gaslight. And in it, this man strives to convince his wife that she's insane. He tells her things that she saw were in her imagination. Like, for example, she finds this letter that had some information in there that he didn't want her to know. And she brought it up later going, "This all started when I found that letter." And he says, "I remember that. You came to me saying you found this letter and you stood there with nothing in your hand." He manipulates her into thinking the letter never existed and the whole thing was in her mind like a hallucination. He dims the lights in the house, and when she asks about it, he claims the lights are not dimming and it's all in her mind. As the play and film progress, his wife begins to believe that she's gone insane. So when someone is gaslighting you, they're working to cause you to believe that you cannot properly perceive reality. And that's because reality is something a narcissist cannot cope with. And this is an extremely damaging form of abuse. It involves feeding the victim false information, causing the victim to question their own judgment or intuition. They question the victim's thoughts as though they're not based in reality. They divert away from the subject. They can use soothing words to manipulate the victim to end the confrontation, like my mom used to say things like, if you knew a mother's love, and then it would make me look like the bad person for confronting her about a terrible, abusive thing she'd done to me or said to me. Gaslighting involves several techniques that are intended to manipulate, and they're often in response to you confronting them about something they've done. Remember, a narcissist is never going to take actual responsibility for their behavior. There's always going to be some reason or excuse. Actually, that just reminds me. I saw my brother who had spent Christmas with my mother, and she was talking about something from her childhood being terrible or something. I can't remember exactly what it was, but basically, it was just the mentioning of some painful memories she has. And he said, a lot of people, when they have problems like that, they go to therapy. And my mom actually replied saying she cannot go to therapy. And the reason why is she has a condition in her eyes called Fuchs dystrophy, which she does actually have. And it has to do with your tear production in your eyes, I believe. And she said if she went to therapy, she would cry, and crying is very damaging to her eyes. So if she went to therapy, she would damage her eyes, so she cannot go. He's tried to get her to go to therapy many times. He is accepting that this is just never going to happen, but he still brings it up from time to time. And she just always has a different excuse. And there was a day that excuse would have just made me angry, but now I just laugh at it. It's like she is just reaching for anything to not address her problems, to not take any responsibility for herself. Anyway, that's not gaslighting, of course. It was just a funny story that came to mind. So gaslighting, yes, it involves several techniques that are intended to manipulate. And the whole point is, like, if you come to that person and you're trying to talk to them about something they've done that hurts your feelings or upset you, they can't handle that, so they do whatever they can to get back in control of that conversation. And gaslighting is a very common behavior that they will turn to. So what are these techniques? It can involve countering, so they'll counter your claims by making you question them. "Oh, I didn't say that. Are you really sure about that?" They make you question your understanding or memory of reality. And this can be particularly impacting when you're a child. I mean, we look to our mothers to help us understand reality. And then when our mothers are saying things that make us question what we're seeing and hearing, it's even more damaging when you're a child. It was really routine for my mom to say, "Oh, I did not say that. You have comprehension problems. I say one thing and you hear another." Another technique is withholding. They'll pretend they don't understand what you mean, or they'll claim ignorance on the entire subject. I have no idea what you're talking about. You're really confusing me right now. They can kind of move into a more victim role when they're doing this to make it sound like you're just talking over their head. And I know a narcissist always wants to look like the best and like they're perfect, but especially a covert narcissist, they'll let that go and move into a very victimized position, because in that way they're still getting control over you. Because if they look like they're being weak, like you're victimizing them, well, you actually have a conscience. And so that will manipulate you into not proceeding with what you're saying, because it makes you look like the bad guy. It makes you feel like the bad guy, like, oh, I'm making her feel so bad about herself, so I need to stop. So even though it's like victimizing themselves and making themselves look weak, it actually is still putting them in power and still in control of the conversation. My mom used to say things to me like, "Oh, I can be so dingy sometimes," or "This is all just too much for my dummy brain," or "I have no idea what you're talking about. You're just, your memory is so much better than mine. I can't remember these things." And she would turn the entire conversation into one where I was the one victimizing her. They can use a technique called trivializing. They'll minimize the situation and exaggerate your reaction. "Oh, you're so dramatic. You're so sensitive." My mom used to say to me so many times, "You just never feel love no matter what I do." As though the real problem isn't that she did something super hurtful and abusive. The real issue is that I'm just too sensitive and I can't handle basic life. They will practice denial. They'll just deny what happened. They'll say they don't remember it, or they'll blame their behavior on someone else. I mean, my mom would say, "I don't remember that." This can be really harmful because, like, if I went to my mom and talked to her about something she said to me and she would deny having ever said that, well, then you can start to question your own memory, your own version of reality in your mind, because you so clearly remember this person saying this, and yet they are insisting they did not say it. When I went no contact with my mom, for the first time, she had said something terrible to me in a text. And when I told my siblings and my mom's sister what had happened, when they talked to her about it, she did her usual, "Oh, I did not say that to her." And for the first time, I was able to prove that she did. I took a screenshot of the text and I sent it to them. I cannot explain how validated that made me feel, how good it made me feel. Like, there were so many times I would tell somebody else my mom had said something, and she would just absolutely deny it and make me look like a liar. And then people wouldn't believe me, they wouldn't trust me, and there was just nothing I could do about it. But finally I was able to prove, not to my mom, but to my siblings and my aunt and the people I had talked to about this. She said word for word what I said she said. Yes, she says these things to me. Now you may be wondering, well then, what did my mom say to that? Because then they went to her and said, "We can see the text that you sent her, and yes, you did say that to her." She said it was a typo. Like, an entire paragraph was a typo. And my mom, to this day, has never admitted to what she said to me that ultimately led me to see I needed to go no contact with her. That was almost 3 years ago. She still denies it, even with written evidence right in front of her. When I went no contact with my mom, she sent me a very long text. I didn't read it that day because I knew it was going to be all about how everything is my fault, nothing is hers, and I just couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't deal with it anymore. But I did finally sit down a few months later and I read it. And in it, she listed all the things that she remembers from my childhood. She'd say these, affectionate sounding statements of I remember you sitting in your little rocking chair with your little blonde curls. I remember this. I remember that. This was all of her supposed evidence that she is an amazing mother, and I must be out of my mind if I think she isn't a wonderful mother who loves me very much like any other mother in the world does with their children. And she ended it by saying, "It's not my fault that you never feel loved." For a narcissist, the entire purpose of gaslighting is to take all the blame and responsibility for their own behavior and to cast it on their victim, the victim that they're already abusing. And that's why this is so damaging, because you're already being abused. You're already having terrible things said to you. You're being treated in terrible ways. And then on top of that, they're making you carry the burden as the source of all of that mistreatment and abuse. Gaslighting makes a person not trust their own self, and it moves them into a state of dependence on the version of reality that's presented by the abuser. And the longer it goes on, the more it works. So if you're raised by a covert narcissist, where being gaslit is a normal part of your entire childhood and adolescence, by the time you become an adult, you've endured years and years of gaslighting during the most vulnerable time in your life. So you've been taking on all of the damage that gaslighting causes for almost 2 decades. And because of that, this person can so easily maintain their control over us even into adulthood. And it's shown in how we feel about ourselves, how much we don't trust ourselves. I hear so many people say, "Well, I'm considering going no contact with my narcissistic mother, but I just feel so guilty for even thinking about it. Am I wrong about this?" And it's because we've been led to feel the problems in the relationship with our mothers is our fault. So the burden is ultimately on us. Being gaslighted can cause you to have a very poor self-image because you're led to believe you can't even determine what's real and what isn't. You're led to believe you're always in the wrong. It can make you feel very confused, anxious, unable to trust yourself. And it's really all the more damaging when gaslighting is part of a larger array of abusive behaviors toward the person. And if your mother is a covert narcissist, then that indeed is your situation. It's just one of several other forms of abuse that you have suffered and endured. If you've been gaslit for a long time, you can feel uncertain about your own perceptions. You can question your memory. You can believe that you're irrational. You can feel incompetent, inconfident, and worthless. And you may find yourself constantly apologizing to people in general, not just your abuser, because you're so used to carrying the blame for everything and being a problem to others. You can become withdrawn because you don't feel you can have normal, healthy relationships with healthy people. It's important to come to see when you're being gaslit currently, but also the times in your past where your mother has gaslit you, because then you can start working on restoring your trust in yourself and understanding reality as it truly is. My mom said those things to me not because I actually am overly sensitive, and not because I actually never feel loved, and not because I have comprehension problems. None of that is true. She said those things to manipulate me, so she wouldn't have to take any responsibility for her abusive behavior toward me. I'd go to her wanting to resolve a problem, but instead she'd show absolutely no empathy toward me whatsoever. And the conversation always ended with the understanding that the entire problem is actually me. So if you've been gaslit, and you know you have some irrational thoughts and feelings because of it, what should you do? Talk to yourself. And I know that's a little funny to think about and humorous, because we're thinking about how can I get myself to not feel insane, and now we're talking about talking to ourselves. It can sound like a crazy behavior, but it's not. When you feel guilty for taking steps to protect yourself from your mother's abuse, tell yourself out loud, audibly, "I'm only feeling this way because my mother manipulated me into feeling this way. It's not based in reality. I have nothing to feel guilty about, and I deserve to be protected from abuse." When you feel scared of trying something because of a lack of confidence, tell yourself, I feel this way because of the abuse of my mother, not because these fears are based in reality. Reality says that I am a capable, competent person. My mother was lying because she's a narcissist and refused to take responsibility for her behavior. So in other words, counter those feelings and thoughts with actual words you speak to yourself. You have spent years having these false statements fed to you, so start feeding yourself different statements. And do say them out loud. Maybe not in public, of course, but not just thinking them inside. And that's because when you say them, you're speaking them out loud and hearing them. So you're using multiple sensory inputs, which can help these statements become more ingrained in your brain and a part of who you are. This is an actual therapeutic technique, and there's a lot of evidence that it works. And I encourage you to begin trying it immediately. It takes time, so be patient with yourself, but it does work. And here's how you'll know it's working. You'll start to feel angry. Like, I reached a point where I was like, how dare my mom say I have comprehension problems when I don't? How dare my mom say that I'm just too sensitive? Like, anyone would be upset with their mother if they said that to them. How dare she say that I just never feel loved? Because I can feel loved. I just don't feel loved by her because she doesn't treat me in loving ways. That anger is a very good sign. It shows that you're breaking free from that manipulation and seeing reality more clearly. So keep going, keep working at it. Keep saying statements to yourself that bring you more and more into reality so you can see what a wonderful, valuable person you are. The anger will eventually subside as you connect with your true self and find peace. It'll happen. It will. I promise. Please feel free to post in the comments if you have something to share or have a question or just a story that you'd like to share. I really do love to hear from you. I'll see you next week. And remember, to all my fellow survivors out there, you are worthy, you are valuable, and you are beautiful, whether your mom sees that or not.